On this week's episode, we have Zach Day on the podcast. Zach is the co-founder of Newt Force, which is force plates for pitchers. So there's force plates that are actually built into mounds for pitchers. Really cool stuff. It was something I've been interested in for a while, learning more about. And Zach's got a great background. He pitched professionally, made it to the major leagues as a pitcher, and shares some really good insight into some pitching development strategies that he was able to learn over the course of his career too. So hope you enjoy this one with Zach Day. All right, we now welcome on to the podcast, Zach Day. Zach, thanks for coming on, man.
No, I appreciate it, Patrick. It's good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we had a pretty good conversation a couple weeks ago, and I know you with your background and being having pitched, professionally and in the big leagues, and being in technology for a really long time. I was thinking on my ride over here, like one of the things that I wanted to ask you because I think a lot about it, and you see everything with the Chat GPT and everything, but where do you think AI is going to come into play in baseball in the next few years? Like, do you think AI is something that's going to impact the game at various levels, or do you think that it's more so, yeah, it's going to be great for our everyday life and, giving ChatGPT prompts to write essays for kids, but maybe not as much from the baseball realm?
It's a good question. I've thought about it, and I think we're on the. It for me, I can see a couple different paths of where it could start to enhance and really kind of help, at least from my experience. I I think for speed and for ease of use, and for uh, individualization, I think it's going to help, right? So I think you're going to be a little bit more be able to get a little more granular with the data and be able to say, hey, this is my put the inputs and the outputs, be able to be a little more granular if you have the access to the data. Then and it's gonna, I hope, I think it's gonna allow more conversation initially, because it's going to hopefully open up those conversations to those that might not feel comfortable to be able to, that could prompt something that might not feel comfortable being able to use it in that way in previous ways. They're going to be able to search quicker, get to the information faster, as long as I think as long as the interesting part is that you can see the path to a lot of this is like, okay, if I have the information and let's take, we're using ground forces, or we're using your biomechanics, or you take motion capture data and you take ground forces and you take what other inputs you want to put into it. And so I think you're going to be able to put some inputs into it, say, hey, what were the best pitches that you had, and then kind of individualize, hey, what were the results and what best came out of that. I think that's going to help us get closer to that individualization. At least I hope so. Anyway,
When you look back and reflect back on your pitching career, like what were some of the changes you would have made knowing what you know now with all the technology, and we'll get into kind of the ground force for pitchers and things
yeah.
like that too. But I mean, I feel like you're the
I
perfect
would
guy to
say,
ask.
yeah, for me, I've thought about this, so I can backtrack a little bit with TrackMan and try and, I put myself in the shoes, because I didn't have the data when I was playing. First of all, I'll back up and say we had VHS, right? So it was like, hey, let's put in the tapes and do VHS. So when I started with TrackMan in 2008, everybody's like, oh, you must be I was a information guy. I wasn't a data, like I was an information guy. I had no idea what this information really, I mean, you can only hypothesize it like we do on a lot of this stuff, but I didn't know. I didn't have access to the information until we got into it. So, I'd always put myself in those shoes now when I was kind of getting the information, be like, okay, I was a sinker ball pitcher. Why did I induce so many ground balls? I didn't have the data on myself, but I could tell you that I had a high release. I created a plane that was steep, and I had a low spin. And then that led me to Patrick, that led me to like, okay, well, why did I have low spin? So I pick up a baseball, and I realized that when I was throwing and gripping the ball with my two seams, along the two seams, And this is kind of the exploratory piece that I love. I realized like, oh man, I actually don't release the ball and my pressure isn't on my fingertips. It's on my middle pads. So can you imagine trying when I'm, you think about that, you're like, okay, how do you kill spin? Well, you're definitely going to be killing spin if you throw off your middle pads and not your fingertips, right? Like, and so there was like, oh, so I had a high release, I had low spin, and I created plane and I threw hard. So, I mean, I threw that sink and I threw from the right side of the rubber. So you imagine that going straight down is what essentially I use my height to be able to create that access. What would I have changed? I would have played off that sinker. I would have understand why it was effective and what my strengths were, and then I would have tried to develop off that sinker. Right? I would have had I think my secondary repertoire, and then also I would have used, the tall and fall method didn't work for me. Right? Like it was like, oh, stay taller. Well, that necessarily wasn't the reason why I was getting the sink on my pitch. Right? I didn't have to. I think it just hurt me. So there were certain aspects of like teachings that were just like, okay, these are a little bit flawed, but I definitely from a secondary pitch, I would have learned what best to play off that secondary pitch based off of that and how to attack hitters. And then I would probably mechanically, I would have definitely have been able to use my lower half and understand how I was using my lower half efficiently. Um, I was late. So, from the speeding up and slowing down, using lower half, braking, those type of things, I was flawed. Like there were certain things that, I know I could have done better and just to create a more of efficiency. Those are two ways that just jump out to me, how I would have used this data to be able to hopefully prevent the injuries, but also improve my secondary pitches. So
Did you ever work with anybody when you were in high school? Because I know you were drafted out of high school. So did you work with anybody, or was it just, hey, just raw talent and didn't really know what you were doing?
so when the off season where I trained a lot, but then no, I did not have a pitching coach in the off season. It was myself. Yeah, we would find other pitchers in the area in Cincinnati here, Patrick, and we trying to find a space to be able to throw and find a mound and find a catcher. Well, we did not. There was not no data, no capture. Just get loose and long toss and get off the mound and try and you're exploring, A/B testing essentially. Hey, did that work? All right, no, it didn't. That didn't work. So yeah, it's
What was
crazy how it's changed, right? It's
Oh, I know. I
totally
mean, I'm
changed.
sure you think about this more than me because you play in the big leagues of just how much better just you could have been at such a younger age. But why did you decide out of high school? Like what here, let me ask you another question. Would you ever let your kids sign out of high school knowing what you know about professional baseball?
Uh, if there's a certain number in the first round, yes.
Mm,
Beyond that, it would be a harder decision.
okay.
And I think it's a combination of a few things, and I wouldn't even say it's NIL, but I would say obviously it does factor in, but um, I think it's the challenge of professional baseball at a young age. It's the advancement at the Power Five schools when in the coaching and the development, the facilities that they have. Um, Going into pro ball at 17, 18 years old and making those bus trips and playing in the middle of nowhere and living, staying out of the hotel for it, it wasn't easy. It was actually, and then not to say it needs to be easy, but it just wasn't. And then I think that even add another layer onto that is, you have to work after. Even though there's a number of us, a small number of us that make it. There's an even smaller number that actually um, can finish up and really like if you finish up at 27, you're gonna want to find something else to do and just to be able to you have a next chapter in your life. So I think from that standpoint, that transition is another reason why it's hard. Like you have to really think about that transition piece coming out of professional sports going into the real world of like, hey, what am I going to do after professional sports? I love the fact that they're actually thinking about this because it did, Patrick, it didn't happen while we were playing. I actually, you had to like be very proactive, but now you see with social, like, that's one advantage that, I see with like with LinkedIn or with social media, like that you can really start to figure out what you want to do after your career and you can be proactive on that. That's one thing I wish I would have, had as I was going out, the access to a lot of that stuff. So I'm excited. So that does make a case like, hey, look, you can potentially do it, but it's not easy. Yeah, tough choice. I probably, if I would, they get asked this question. If I, so I was a fifth round draft pick by the Yankees. Um, and I was signed to go to Clemson. And I would have today, if it was today, I would have went to Clemson at fifth in the fifth round. Like my choice would have changed. Back then, I don't think, I'm happy with my decision. Probably would have made the same decision, but today, day and age, having seen what I've done and been around, I probably would have went to school. So.
Interesting. Did you feel like since you didn't have that college degree that transition as you referred to it, like it was like, man, I gotta figure out something in baseball because I don't that's all I've ever really ever done.
A little bit. There's always that sense like, hey, it's easier, find something that, but I went back to school. I got my 4-year degree, even signing out of high school. So um, it's never too late from that standpoint. I think the access also, I think it was tougher. We didn't have the online classes from when I was playing, but um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it does. It factors in. It's like, okay, am I going to restart? I liken it to somebody that's gone to med school and you or become a lawyer and you're 3 years in and you finally are getting settled in and then they rip it away, right? You're at the highest peak of the highest level of highest level. Now somebody tells you, hey, look, by the way, you got to find another profession. You can't practice anymore. So it's a gut check, right? Like, so I feel for those that are in that position. Some stay in the baseball space because it's known and that's what they love. That's what they grow up and they love doing it. But I think hopefully they're starting to do a little better job. But yeah, I would say that can factor into it for sure. You want to stay in sports or you kind of that knowledge that's a comfort level and that's get that you have that connection. When I pick up the phone and make a call, I can, I traveled to Japan. The language barrier, I was open up with TrackMan, talking baseball, even though there's a language barrier, the communication was actually rather easy because of the baseball background, because of the baseball family. We were able to connect and make those connections. So it made that a lot easier, even though the language barrier was tough here. So there's some comfort in that.
You were at TrackMan for a long time. Like what are some takeaways that maybe people wouldn't think about that you experienced when you were at TrackMan?
Uh, it took a long time. Uh, it was harder than what everybody probably thought it was. Everything goes slower than what you expect. Um, I would say that we were probably pretty close to shutting down the baseball side of things before it finally took off.
Really?
It's really not. It's not easy to get people to change and to think about things differently in that realm. So that's one of my biggest takeaways was like, oh, everybody's gonna get it. Oh, yeah, this is gonna be great. Data, it's yeah, not everybody. It's always harder than what you think it's gonna be. So I think that was that, and it was. I saw it as I always knew that the information was going to be valuable. It took a lot longer, and I'm surprised. The education piece I think has been actually undervalued. Like it's been a good education piece because I think about it from the hitting side, Patrick. I think about it like it's been talked about, matching the plane of the pitch. And one of my things that I, early on with TrackMan that I saw very early on was the plane of the pitch. And how a flat fast, and I call it flat, it's probably not the right, steep flat. I call it flat plane, steep plane, but that was jumped out so early to me. And like, but that's what's been talked about. Like, if you read books about about hitting, it's, hey, look, it's been around. We just bring light to education. The information is now there. And I think that that's the biggest, I think, change that we have. So it's called information overload. And, that's our job to be able to kind of weed through that. So,
Yeah, simplify it. Well,
yeah.
one of the reasons I thought having you on would be a lot of fun is, I've messed around and I've done some research on force plates for hitting. But I don't know a ton about the force plates for pitching. And obviously you have a company called, Newt Force, and you're the co-founder of that company. And so I was like, man, I want to learn a little bit more about this. I think this is interesting stuff. From the hitting standpoint, I'm always looking to see if we can steal anything from the pitchers who are usually ahead of the hitters, it seems. But uh, why get into force plates for pitchers? Like, what was your thought process behind that?
Yeah, so I back up. Les Johnson and I met each other at DBU. He brought in TrackMan. We had awesome conversations over the years, just on the information, and I've always kind of, okay, the input and the output, right? So your input is ground forces, your movement profile, what you're doing to create the output. We didn't have that. It was kind of like, okay, you had your release point. So I was always very interested in the input and what created the velocity, what created what created the command, what created a lot of things, the efficiency. Why was somebody more efficient and just looked like they were throwing easier than somebody else? Like, those are always, again, that goes back to the exploring, kind of trying to figure things out and kind of the why of what they're doing. So that's, Wes introduced me to Kyle as my co-founder. And we just decided to try and, hey, look, I don't know if it's crazy or not, but we tried to commercialize it. And then the pandemic hit and COVID hit, and probably timing wasn't awesome, but I just felt like, hey, there was an opportunity to empower the coaches. There were some things that we saw and some value that we had, and that was a big reason why I wanted to jump in as far as getting that information to the coaches. It's something that I enjoyed on the TrackMan side, was empowering the coaches and being able to see them grow, and being able to help them in their career and the players ultimately. But that was a big reason why. And and the hitting side, I look at my golf game and I try and go on the pitching side. It's the same thing. It's kind of that weight shift, or getting that weight, and our leg, it's back leg to the pitching side to the front leg. And how do you transfer the force, and how much force are you generating? And you know in my golf game, I was too far ahead, I think, last couple of times I played. So my head and my body's out in front of my front leg, and my hands are behind and I can't catch up. So it's the same thing with the pitching. You look at, the hand is almost that club head. If you get too far, you get too far and you can't stop, and you can't, stop the brakes, put the brakes on them. We call them, you can't decelerate. Then look, you're going to be late. You're going to be, timing's going to be off. A lot of things are going to be off. So it's being able to, understand what that player can do, how they can move, how they can stop. There's a lot of things that go involved, but that energy transfer and that information was, I think, exciting for me to be able to say, oh man, you know what? It's just what was really exciting. It was twofold, and there's a lot of things that were exciting about it. But one of the things that I loved is that one change, one little thing can take a player from potential to making it. And it happened to me, so I can say that, right? It was just a grip change. I would have never made it if I didn't start throwing that sinker. It was just grabbing the ball with literally two seams. And I think you can say the same with somebody that's not using the lower half. I mean, you might find that one or two, three guys, that are like, oh man, he just, he's strong. He just doesn't time it right. And it just is, and it clicks. And then there you go. You got another, few 3 miles an hour on it. And hopefully they make it right. So that's the exciting part. It's just one change, something that hits home can really make an impact. So
Is there anything that you saw with the Newt Force when it comes to just ground force pressure that was just like surprised you, or like was there anything that was like kind of like an aha moment for you when you started really testing a lot of pictures on it? Like what were some of the initial findings that maybe changed the way you viewed training pitchers, or maybe it was what the coaches were telling you as feedback as what they were finding?
Yeah, so I would say, and it's maybe not, it's maybe more the information and it's how we think about it. It's kind of like spin and be able to measure spin. It's like it just changes how we kind of bucket things and how we think about spin and how to use it. One of the things that was interesting was the back leg. However you create it, it's for me. I broke it down and I kind of look at the graph that we say the forces that are created, and this is forces pushing towards second base, and everybody creates those forces a little bit different. Obviously, there's a minimum amount of force that we have to create to throw a certain velocity, but it was more that it's not a jump, right? It's a drift, and then you're driving in, and then all of a sudden you got to just, and then it's when that rotates and have those three phases, um, as opposed to like, hey, I'm just gonna just get force. So it's a progression, and really kind of honing in on that progression, I think is a one thing. It's the total force, and you need time to build up force. So that's one thing that sticks out is like, oh, when I started, I'm like, yeah, create more force. You got to time the force, and you got to create it efficiently and effectively. So that was one thing. And then the brakes, when you slam on the brakes, it helps the rotational, and there's different ways to slam them on. There's different guys and different methods to be able to slam it, but you have to stop. You have to be able to stop those, and I think that was and the value of that from a rotational standpoint was one of the things that kind of has jumped off. If you're not efficient at braking or stopping, then you're not going to be as effective when it comes to that. So there's little cues that you would expect, but there are kind of little nuances in that. Just again, it goes to the education piece, and I think it helps that education and that teaching is, hey, the coach, it goes back to the coach saying, hey, you got to use your lower half more. Like, what does that mean? Like, when I was getting cut, we want you to use your legs. All right. Well, what does that mean? Like, oh, what does that mean? And, that's the cool part of what we're seeing. So,
Remember you telling me about med balls and doing some med ball drills to help improve that. Like what exactly are there certain drills that you think help improve guys put on the brakes, or like what is the purpose for guys doing a lot of med ball stuff?
so we're testing out again, we're practicing, they call it practicing medicine. We're kind of practicing training, right? We're all practicing training in a way. So we're practicing using, and one of the things we're trying to do is use med balls. But one of the advantages that we're trying to see, and this is Will and Kyle down at, we have an R&D center down in Little Rock, that we, locally, there's some teams that use it. But we're testing out some implementation. One of the things that MedBall allows us to do is to be able to test the lower half efficiency without being necessarily ramped up for throwing, which is nice because not every time during the season can you get, but you can get on and throw some med balls. So we're looking at multiple ways, and Will was down at LSU with Wes as the assistant strength and conditioning coach. So we're testing different ways to be able to improve it with some high school teams down there initially. Initial results have been actually really solid as far as just building up and ramping up. But what we've done is individualize. Some will be that back leg, some will be the brakes. We've individualized based off the mound, and they've put together a sampling and assessment of what med ball program based off of what you need brakes, you need to accelerate, we need you to move a little bit faster. So there's the concoction that they put together to start to say. So everybody, they just did it with five pitchers recently. It was a 6 to 8 week program. And then the results have come back, and they've come back well, right? Just say, and every program was different for each individual pitcher. It wasn't the same program because they didn't have the same inefficiencies, right? So you have to look at, how they move and how they develop. So we're trying to hone in and enhance It's not like you enhance what the coaches are already doing, to really focus on that lower half. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing a good kick up from the average velo and just peak velo just in the 6 to 8 weeks, just developing that lower half efficiency. So,
Biggest difference between the best pitchers who have thrown on it versus just average pitchers? Like I know there's been some of the best pitchers in the world who've
yeah,
thrown on the mound. Anything are you that you're able to share?
yeah, I would say if you look at some of the top guys, um, they create and they stop. They create, they accelerate, they do the combination of three. There's different ways that some of them do it, but they all do something really, really well, like exceptional. Whether it's getting into it and building up that energy in that back leg to breaking, they just get that force. They have a higher force, and then they use it and they rotate. So we measure something that's called a Z transfer that gives a little hint into the rotation on how fast they move as well. And they time that really, really well. So that if you look at your hand as the club head, those forces are coming out just before that hand is getting ready there and then releasing the ball. So that peak, that break force, and those things are timing up really well. So they do the combination of the energy flow, and it just makes it look easy, right? The guys that are looking, you know, guys that are looking like he's not even losing his lower half, and you get on the mound, and you're like, oh my gosh, he's through the roof as far as creating forces. That's what can be deceiving with the mound too. You're like, you see some of the guys that just look like they're using X max effort, and there's some guys are just kind of getting in and using it. Doesn't always translate to the force in the ground, right? Like it's just, but you see the guys that have the easy velo, that have the efficient, you look at their forces they're creating, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy creates this much force and energy and times it up this well. So I would say that the really elite movers, they also do one other thing, and I think this is an interest that we're kind of keeping an eye out, but they drop their weight. In the back leg, they drop their weight when their leg lift their leg, they drop their leg, they relax, and they kind of build that energy going down the mound. So I won't get into detail on that, but we're seeing some correlation with that as well. So which
Is
is
there
cool.
something to do with how much a pitcher weighs? I mean, is there like a threshold in terms of like, hey, for you need to be at a certain weight, or does it not matter at all when it comes to how your
I
measurements are
think
running?
Randy was his thing was 180. I think it's
180?
kind of that 180 was, once it's over that, we measure it a couple different ways. We look at it, and we look at the ratio to take out the weight to be able to say how you're moving and how you're creating force compared to anybody. And then we also use both. We use your weight to be able to see that. But about, that 180 is 180 is kind of that benchmark to where if you're, getting to that point, you need some force. But yeah, it does. The weight does matter. So.
You guys ever gonna get into hitting?
It's a good question. Um, yeah, I think we always like to explore if the opportunity presents itself that we feel like we could help and really make an impact on the hitting side, and help coaches with some of the things that we're working on and give them the information. Part of what we do and do well is returning that information in a way that's simplified and that they can use in their own space from a pitching standpoint. So yeah, I think I'd like to. I think we find a space to be able that it makes sense. We could potentially see that, if we feel like we can enhance and really kind of give the coach something that they don't have.
How many teams, facilities, etc., players are currently using the mound?
So we have 8 MLB teams right now. We have a few teams with multiples that are using it throughout to train. I call it really train. In a way, they're training lower half and training forces using this. And the SEC, we have seven teams now that are 7 programs. We're going to be delivering to our 7th here shortly. And then we just landed a couple ACC teams. So we're growing on the college side. There's a lot of interest. A lot of our interest comes because it is coach friendly. the information comes within 2 or 3 seconds. You're getting it very similar to what you'll see the reading, so you can, you can get that information along with sync video. And what you see from a data standpoint with what you see with your eyes, that replay again. When we started in the TrackMan side, really kind of helping out the coaches when we get that information, that players get that information to their hands quickly, it did make a big impact. So,
Where do you foresee like yourself going with Newt Force in the future? Like, what are other? Is it at this point like where you feel like you got the product where you want it, and now it's just getting the word out more than anything else, or do you feel like you have a vision for like things you want to continue to do with it?
I think it's going to be driven, Patrick. I think it's going to be driven by the request. We've already have some things in the pipeline. A couple of the things would be like, hey, we're working, try and pulling in some ballistics or ball data. We're looking at a couple other things to enhance the video. But we're really leaning on the coaches, right? So we have a vision to help. Our vision is to help the coaches, and that's really going to be dictated. We have some ideas on how we might be able to do that, but ultimately they're going to be the ones that tell us, you know, we can use this and this is going to help us. So I kind of take that approach to be able to say, hey, where's the biggest impact that we can have? And we're really, we're not on the field, right? We're not in the game. Where's the biggest impact that we can have on a day-to-day basis when it comes to the training side of things? And that's, there's definitely going to be some opportunities to do some things. And really the coaches, we lean on the coaches for for some direction and some help when it comes to that.
Gotcha. Zach,
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on today, man. It's been a lot of fun.
No, I appreciate it, Patrick. I enjoyed it and look forward to having some more conversations for sure.